Neymar's 2017 transfer to PSG sent shockwaves throughout the world of football. The idea of leaving an institution like Barcelona, one of the biggest clubs in the world and the most successful of the preceding decade, to join the nouveau riche ostentations of Qatari-owned PSG at the age of 25 mystified many onlookers. Neymar was on course to become a Barcelona legend, held in the same esteem in Catalonia as compatriots like Romario, Ronaldinho and Rivaldo. One-third of the greatest attacking trio in modern football history, alongside Lionel Messi and Luis Suarez, Neymar was 5 years younger than Messi, and there was an expectation at the Camp Nou that he would at some stage supersede Barcelona's greatest ever player as the club's main man. The €222 million fee paid by PSG, which not only constituted a new world record, but more than doubled the previous highest fee, distorted the entire transfer market. Football would never quite be the same again. 6 years on, Neymar's potential €86 million move to Saudi Arabia this summer, by contrast, has been greeted broadly with a shrug of the shoulders. Neymar is still only 31 years old. He is 4 years younger than Robert Lewandowski and the same age as Mohamed Salah. Neymar ought to have been sought after by every super club in Europe the minute that it became clear that he was available, and his move to Al Hilal viewed as the ultimate coup for the Saudi state in their effort to become a major player on the world stage. The reality, however, is that the likes of Manchester City and Real Madrid weren't clamouring to sign Neymar. Xavi expressed an interest at Barcelona, albeit only on loan, until he was reminded once again that they don't have any money and that he would have to pawn off even more of the family jewels to make it happen, and talk of Manchester United exploring a move soon went cold. Todd Boehly was keen, of course he was, but Neymar's former PSG boss Mauricio Pochettino didn't feel as though the Brazilian was the right profile of player for Chelsea. Whilst no one else would meet PSG's asking price or match Neymar's existing wage demands, Saudi Arabia were willing to increase his salary by 6 times. There is a sentiment, which stretches all the way from Paris to Porto Alegre, that Neymar's legacy will be one of unfulfilled promises, or worse still, failure. Writing in RMC Sport following Neymar's move, French journalist Daniel Riolo wrote, quote, "Do we realise that Neymar, in terms of transfer and salary, is the biggest failure in the history of football? I can't think of a bigger failure for what he cost. It's horrible." End quote. And yet, Neymar won 13 trophies in 6 seasons in Paris, scoring 118 goals and making 77 assists in only 173 matches. Neymar won a treble at Barcelona, scoring 39 goals that season from the left flank, and he has scored more goals for Brazil, at the age of 31, than any other player in history. So what to make of Brazil's boy wonder as he says farewell, or au revoir at least, to elite-level football? Well, funnily enough, that's what today's video is all about, as we attempt to make sense of the riddle wrapped inside of an enigma that is the legacy of Neymar Jr. We might as well start with the biggest criticism of Neymar in terms of his legacy within the sport that has lingered like a bad smell around him for a number of years. The narrative goes something a bit like this. Neymar should never have left Barcelona. He was at one of the biggest and best clubs in world football, which was getting the best out of him, and he threw it all away because of ego and greed. That is probably the perspective of about 3/4 of football fans, or at least that's what it feels like, and more like 95% of fans here in England, and the odds are, even if you don't believe it, you've probably at least heard it said. In 4 seasons at Barcelona, Neymar won 8 trophies, including a continental treble in the 2014-15 season, in which he, Messi and Suarez were virtually unplayable. Between them, they scored 122 goals and made 66 assists that season alone, and though Messi was of course the main man, Neymar wasn't too far behind. Neymar scored braces in both the quarter and semi-final of Barcelona's Copa del Rey run against Atletico Madrid and Villarreal, and a goal against Athletic Bilbao in the final. In the Champions League, Neymar scored 6 goals in 4 matches against PSG and Bayern Munich in the quarter and semi-final, scoring in every single game. And he scored again in the final, with the final goal of the game, as Barca beat Juventus 3-1. Neymar was on top of the world, and he was still only 23 years old. At the beginning of the following campaign, when Neymar scored 4 goals and assisted the other in a single 5-2 win against Rayo Vallecano, his head coach Luis Enrique stated, quote, "Defenders only have 2 choices when facing him, concede a penalty or let him score. In one word, he was breathtaking." End quote. Neymar finished 3rd in Ballon d'Or voting in 2015, behind the inevitable duo of Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, but there were few doubts in most people's minds as to who the next greatest player in the world was. Neymar had cemented that status in his early 20s, and with Ronaldo already having turned 30 and Messi aged 28, it seemed as though Neymar would soon be the man on top. As far as most people were concerned, Neymar wasn't just a shoo-in to win the Ballon d'Or. As soon as Messi and Ronaldo passed the baton on to him, he stood a fairly decent chance of winning a few. All he had to do was bide his time, keep progressing, keep winning trophies, and wait for time to take its inevitable toll upon Messi and Ronaldo. Instead, in the summer of 2017, less than 5 months after scoring 2 and assisting 2 against PSG in one of the greatest Champions League comebacks of all time, and seemingly enshrining himself in Barca folklore in the process, Neymar was pictured holding up the PSG shirt at the Parc des Princes as the most expensive footballer of all time. It was a move which some found hard to even comprehend. Sure, Barcelona hadn't won the Champions League in the past 2 seasons, but PSG had never won the Champions League, and they hadn't even reached the semi-finals since 1995. The likes of Edinson Cavani and Julian Draxler were fantastic players, but Neymar would be leaving behind the most feted front 3 of most people's lifetimes, alongside Messi and Suarez, and a supporting act which included the likes of Andres Iniesta, Sergio Busquets, and Ivan Rakitic. The prevailing wisdom at the time, as was widely reported with some fairly vague sources quoted, was that Neymar wanted to step out beyond Messi's shadow at Barcelona for good, win PSG their first ever Champions League as their talisman, and most likely, claim his first Ballon d'Or as a result. By that metric, if that was indeed the real reason why Neymar joined PSG in 2017, then yes, undeniably, he has failed. At no stage has a plurality, let alone a majority of football fans, felt that Neymar is a better player than Messi. Not even now that Messi is 36 years old, PSG still haven't won the Champions League, and Neymar has never bettered his 3rd place finish in Ballon d'Or voting from 2015 and 2017. In fact, having finished 3rd, 5th and 3rd in his last 3 years at Barca, Neymar never even finished in the top 10 in a full calendar year spent at PSG. In 2019 and 2022, Neymar wasn't even nominated for the Ballon d'Or, nor has he been in 2023. That is 3 seasons in which Neymar should have been at his peak, in which he hasn't been considered among the 30 best players in the world. If you had suggested that might have been the case during Neymar's time at Barcelona, or when he first joined PSG, people would assume that you had been exposed to a relatively serious gas leak. In the last 2 seasons, Darwin Núñez and Antonio Rudiger have made the Ballon d'Or shortlist more times than Neymar. It's sometimes said that the most important ability in football is availability, and on that front too, Neymar's time at PSG has been a car crash. Having made between 41 and 51 appearances in each of his 4 seasons at Barcelona, and as many as 60 as a teenager at Santos, Neymar never played more than 31 games in all competitions in a season in Paris. In Ligue 1, the most he ever featured in was 22 out of a possible 38 games in the 2021-22 campaign. All in all, Neymar missed 134 games through injury in 6 seasons at the Parc des Princes, accounting for over 40% of the club's matches during that time. It is a fairly startling statistic. Even Ousmane Dembele managed to play 30 league games in a season at Barcelona, and Gareth Bale, at the height of his reputation for being an absolute crock, still racked up 42 appearances in all competitions for Real Madrid. Something else that Bale did that season was win the Champions League and score in the final, twice in fact, two things which Neymar never managed at PSG. Even after drafting in the big guns of Ramos and Messi, with all of the Champions League pedigree they have between them, France's Qatari-backed enterprise still couldn't get their hands on the biggest trophy of them all. The closest that the club came was in 2022, during COVID times and playing behind closed doors, when they reached the final but were beaten by a single goal from Kingsley Coman, a Paris-born PSG Academy graduate who left the club on a free transfer in 2014. That is a pretty comprehensive rundown there of why Neymar's move to PSG is perceived as having blighted his legacy, and none of it is untrue. It is just a very selective account of the last 6 years. Whilst it is true that Neymar didn't win the Champions League after leaving Barcelona, nor did Barcelona win it without him. In fact, over the last 6 years, they have failed to come as close as PSG did in reaching the final. The closest that Barca have come during that time is a single semi-final, where they spunked away a 3-0 home win against Liverpool to be dumped out 4-3 on aggregate. The following season, in which PSG reached the final, Barcelona lost 8-2 against Bayern Munich in the heaviest Champions League quarter-final defeat of all time. And in the last 2 seasons, the La Liga giants haven't even got out of the group stage. Neymar's move to PSG was arguably a bad move for Neymar then, but it was undeniably an absolutely catastrophic one for Barcelona. The €222 million fee might have more than doubled the existing world record, but Barca themselves spent €375 million that season on the likes of Ousmane Dembele and Philippe Coutinho, one of whom was never fit and one of whom was absolutely dog dirt, barring his first 6 months at the club. Throw in Antoine Griezmann for a further €120 million, and Barcelona might as well have just incinerated every penny that PSG paid them for Neymar, which would at least have been a provocative statement, rather than just making Josep Bartomeu the most unpopular man in Catalonia since Franco. Effectively, since Neymar left Barcelona, the club has been in a state of almost perpetual chaos. Perhaps some of that would have been averted had Neymar not left, on the pitch at least, but it wouldn't have prevented the off-field drama and financial issues, and there are no guarantees whatsoever that, with Neymar, Barcelona would have won the Champions League during that time. Likewise, Neymar's fitness and injury problems which blighted him at PSG may well have been just as bad at Barcelona. Neymar is one of the most fouled footballers of all time, and the most fouled per 90 of the modern era, at least among elite-level players. Neymar has a reputation for theatrics and for going down easily. Deservedly, he does. But he also gets clattered more often than just about anyone else. His willingness to run at players and supreme ability to beat them with a devastating combination of both flair and agility has seen Neymar scythed down time and time again, sometimes in fairly brutal fashion. That will take its toll upon any athlete, and though there will be those who say challenges nowadays tend to be much less aggressive than they did 20 or 30 years ago, which is also true, the speed of the game now means that the impact could often be just as damaging. Combine that with the amount of football that Neymar played in his early years, which is a common precursor to burnout and increased injury problems later in life, and as bad as his injury problems were at PSG, they probably shouldn't have come as all that much of a surprise. By the age of 21, Neymar had already played well over 200 games. In 2010, aged only 18, he played 60 games and scored an incredible 42 goals for Santos, and though that fell to just 47 appearances in 2011, he also won 13 caps that year, still aged only 19, for Brazil's senior team. There are only a handful of players in the modern era who have racked up 200 plus appearances before turning 21, and almost all of them tailed off in their late 20s or early 30s, such as Neymar's compatriot Ronaldo Nazario, who obviously suffered from devastating injuries from his early 20s onwards, Wayne Rooney and Michael Owen, who played their best football before the age of 25 and were well past their best by 30, and Cesc Fabregas, though never blighted by persistent injury problems, won the last of his 110 caps for Spain at the age of 29. It is a common theme, and it would do Neymar an injustice not to point out the fact that he has bounced back from all of his injury problems to maintain his standards as one of the best players in the world. Europe's elite might not have been falling over themselves to sign Neymar this summer, primarily due to the finances of the deal, Neymar's reputation off the pitch, and uncertainty around how or where they would fit him in, but only a fool would suggest that he isn't still good enough to start for any team on the planet at the age of 31. In terms of sheer ability, there haven't been many people who have been more naturally gifted with a ball at their feet than Neymar Jr. That's not even subjective, really. It is just a statement of fact. Neymar's ability is out of this world. He is, without a doubt, a top 5 player in terms of talent during my lifetime, and second only to Messi of his own generation. Of course, Cristiano Ronaldo has had a much better career than Neymar. I think you could quite legitimately say that the likes of Suarez, Lewandowski, and Benzema also have, hence the discussion around unfulfilled potential, but the idea that any of them are more talented than Neymar would seem to me to be almost absurd. Neymar can do things very naturally with the ball at his feet that few players in history would even attempt. And it's not as though, as some people seem to believe, he is a show pony who lacks the end product of the sports elite. In reality, Neymar's output, particularly on a per 90 or per game basis just because of all of his injuries, is up there with pretty much anyone's. At club level, Neymar has made 487 goal contributions in exactly 500 appearances, excluding Brazil's state championships. On the international stage, he has scored 79 goals from 106 caps. That is more than anyone else in the entire history of Brazil's national team. When you reel off just some of the names, Ronaldo, Romario, Zico, Babito, Pelé, to have outscored every single one of them for the single most famous and successful national team on the planet, that is no small feat. When one thinks of someone like Ronaldinho, who, like Neymar, won 1 Champions League with Barcelona and left Europe at 31, and the fondness and almost universal admiration that people have for him and his talents within the world of football, and then compare it with the perception of Neymar and his talents and achievements, the contrast could hardly be any more stark. Neymar is as ferociously talented as Ronaldinho, and even if you think he isn't, there certainly isn't much in it, whilst also having been much more consistent and deadly in the final third throughout almost the entirety of his career. One can point to Ronaldinho winning the World Cup in 2002, something which Neymar has never and is unlikely to ever do, if indeed he even manages to compete in another one in 4 years' time. But Ronaldinho was also playing in a team which contained the likes of Cafu, Roberto Carlos, Rivaldo, and Ronaldo. Ronaldinho, in fact, was arguably never the main man for Brazil. That was always Ronaldo, and by the time Ronaldo played his last competitive game for Brazil at the 2006 World Cup, it was Kaká who won the Ballon d'Or in 2007. Neymar, by contrast, has been Brazil's main man, uninterrupted, since the age of about 18. Perhaps a lot of people don't realise, or are just too young to remember, but from literally the age of about 14 or 15, Neymar was already being talked about as Pelé's heir for both Santos and Brazil. His profile was so high before he'd even played a game of competitive football that I and anyone else with an interest in football had already heard about him all the way over in England. That's not normal, both in terms of the talent that Neymar had at that age to be propelled to such stardom, but also the level of pressure and expectation that it put on him from such a young age. The Brazil shirt can weigh heavy for anyone. It is the most demanding set of national team supporters and media anywhere in the world, but for the past 10 or 11 years, it has felt like Neymar and 11 others at times. That hasn't helped Brazil, of course, and it's hard to imagine that it can have helped Neymar either. The fact is that despite all of the pressure, most likely for as long as he can remember, and being denied a normal childhood, certainly throughout his teenage years, Neymar still managed to become one of the best players in the world and one of the greatest Brazilian footballers of all time. I think it's often underestimated how unlikely and remarkable that is. Very few players touted for greatness or, God forbid, labelled the next Pelé become even half as good as that. About 6 or 7 years ago, I interviewed someone called Jan Ekra, a once promising academy player who came through the youth ranks with Karim Benzema and Hatem Ben Arfa at Lyon. Ekra said that everyone at Lyon was certain that Ben Arfa would win the Ballon d'Or, and that if he'd fulfilled his potential, he would have done even in the era of Messi and Ronaldo. But in the same sentence, he pointed out that even if Ben Arfa didn't achieve 100% of his potential, he still had a magnificent career in the game. As Ekra pointed out, at the time, Ben Arfa was playing for PSG, one of the best teams in the world, whilst Ekra was playing for Charlotte Independence in the United States. It is very easy for promising youth team players to fall off a cliff before their careers have even begun. Yet to fans, players who win Champions League titles and become their country's all-time record goal scorers can still be considered failures. In that respect, Neymar was always set up to fail. When you are touted as the next Pelé at 15, and your own coach says that you're as good as Messi and will soon be better than him at 19, as Neymar's coach at Santos actually did, it is practically impossible to live up to the expectations. Neymar could have stayed at Barcelona, won another Champions League, the Ballon d'Or, and inspired Brazil to glory at the World Cup, and only then would he not have failed by those metrics. And even then, he wouldn't have exceeded his expectations, he would merely have met them. After all, Pelé won 3 World Cups, and Messi at least 7 Ballon d'Ors. It is true to say that Neymar hasn't maximised every inch of talent that he had, or achieved all that he could have, in a world of what-ifs. That's partly because of circumstances and misfortune, and partly because of character and hard work. Neymar's injuries, for example, are partly a result of the number of games that he played at such a young age, the rough treatment that he has always received, and bad luck. But partly, they are also the result of not always being the most committed professional or dedicated athlete imaginable. It is lucky that Messi and Ronaldo never had any serious long-term injuries throughout their glittering careers. But it's not just luck, part of it is professionalism, diet, and training and conditioning. It's not that Neymar has been a poor professional, he just hasn't been as dedicated as some players, and his talent has allowed him to still have a career that 99% of players can only dream of. Returning to the Ronaldinho comparison just for a moment, he too was not uber professional, or at least he certainly wasn't, from the age of about 22 or 23 onwards. Ronaldinho's love for partying was legendary, far more so than Neymar's, and his output dried up much earlier as well. There can be no doubt that Neymar is a better player at the age of 31 than Ronaldinho was. The biggest difference, in terms of their contrasting legacies, is basically that people like Ronaldinho. That might sound flippant or glib, but it is actually true. Ronaldinho was seen as typifying Brazilian O Yoga Bonito flair and exuberance, and his lifestyle only added to that sense of mystique. He played football with a smile on his face, and most people couldn't help but smile when they watched him. The perception of Neymar, meanwhile, particularly here in England, but to a certain extent throughout the world, is that of a prima donna, greedy, theatrical, and just generally much harder to love. I'm not saying that is a fair assessment, but that is just the perception. A lot of people find Neymar irritating, whether that be because of his behaviour on the pitch or political views off it, and they transpose that dislike of Neymar onto their view of his talents, achievements and legacy. It doesn't make any sense, of course, but to some extent we're all guilty of it. If most people don't like someone, they find it very hard to be fair or impartial in their judgments of them, even if they are judging them on something wholly unrelated to the reason they don't like them. And the same goes for if they are fond of them for an unrelated reason. Ultimately, though, Neymar is a joy to watch. In an era of automatons, he is a free spirit. He has never lost his flair, invention, or love of the game, honed on the streets of Sao Paulo. And as football becomes increasingly robotic and methodical, and that adventurousness and unpredictability is weeded out of players from an ever younger and younger age, I think we'll come to miss Neymar on the pitch if nothing else. Neymar's move to PSG did damage his legacy, I think, but not in the way that most people think. Neymar didn't regress at PSG, even though he became much more injury-prone. He actually peaked in the French capital, producing his most consistent performance levels beyond even his 2014-15 treble-winning season at Barcelona, and influencing the totality of games in a way that he never previously had. It's just that, outside of the Champions League, hardly anyone was watching. Ligue 1 has a fraction of the audience of La Liga, and PSG a fraction of the audience and interest of Barcelona. For many, it was a case of out of sight, out of mind. And unless Neymar pulled 9s and 10s out of the bag in every single Champions League game, the perception that he had ruined his career was cemented, regardless of how he played week in and week out. Of course, Neymar came within 90 minutes of winning the Champions League at PSG, in which case, if he had, and had the Ballon d'Or not been cancelled in 2020 because of COVID, there's every chance that he would have won it. It seems reductive to suggest that, on those 90 minutes, and a deadly pathogen entirely out of his hands, well, at least to the best of our knowledge though, that would certainly negatively impact his legacy, Neymar's entire legacy should rest. Neymar has never been the undisputed star at a club since leaving Santos at the age of 21. At Barcelona, there was Messi, and at PSG, Kylian Mbappe arrived during the same window as him, and later he was joined by Messi again. Despite being PSG's fourth highest goal scorer of all time, Neymar was never actually the club's top scorer in a single season, nor was he ever at Barcelona. A bit like Michael Owen, Neymar's legacy has also been tarnished by the lack of affinity that he receives from any single set of supporters. Who really loves Neymar? Santos fans probably, but he sullied his stellar reputation at Barca by joining PSG, and he always had a complicated relationship with PSG supporters. Even among the Brazilian public, there is a split. The BBC's South American football expert Tim Vickery, reporting from Brazil, stated, quote, "He's certainly judged as a disappointment, which in some ways is harsh as there have been lots of injuries." End quote. So much of Neymar's career just feels inherently unsatisfactory. He never got his hands on the World Cup, or even had a truly iconic World Cup moment. He left Barca for PSG in a move that didn't really work out for anyone, and gave Neymar the image of being greedy and ego-driven. On his own supposed terms, he didn't achieve his goals at PSG, and now he's playing in a massively subpar league, which had an average attendance of just 5,000 last weekend, at the age of only 31. There's just so much that doesn't quite sit right. Neymar might have been as talented as Ronaldinho, but Ronaldinho did get his hands on the World Cup, playing a starring role at the finals. He left Barca because he was pushed out rather than of his own volition. He joined AC Milan, another European footballing giant, where he was also loved, and at 31, he didn't 6x his salary in a move to an authoritarian dictatorship, but rather, he made the much more romantic return to Brazil with Flamengo, Atletico Mineiro, and finally Fluminense. Basically, Ronaldinho's career just felt better, and people were much more fond of him. But that ought not blind us to Neymar's talents or achievements. He is one of the most talented footballers of all time, and one of the best players of his generation. Both tremendously entertaining and freakishly productive in the final third. If it wasn't for the way in which Messi and Ronaldo have distorted people's perspective of statistics, Neymar will be one of the most prolific non-centre forwards of all time. So what is Neymar's legacy? Ultimately, he is the prince who never became king, despite everyone expecting him to inherit that crown at some stage. He is not universally loved, and his career feels unsatisfactory when put alongside fellow greats. But he still burnt brighter, and for longer, than all but a handful of players in the history of the sport. And surely, that must count for something. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. I hope that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, make sure that you're subscribed and have notifications turned on for both this channel, HITC Sevens, and also my second channel, Alfie Potts Harmer, both of which should be on your screens now. You can also find me on Twitter or on Instagram, or Threads as well now, apparently, via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so. And all of those links, plus a whole lot more, should be down in the video description below. I will just apologise at the end here for my voice in this video. Recording this the morning after Hull City versus Leeds, and, for my sins, might have showered a bit. Have a great day.